So at this point, I want to introduce my boss, the executive director of the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, Andrea Lowry, who has tremendous support for the State Archives, and I mean that. I'm just not just saying that for the cameras. I tell her that all the time. She has terrific support for us. And so, Andrea, thank you for being here, and please go.
Thanks, David. And thank you to everyone who's helped put this on today. David and his staff have done a phenomenal job, as usual. So good morning, everybody. I'm Andrea Lowry, as David mentioned. I'm the Executive Director for the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission. And I am thrilled that you all are here to participate in the annual Archives and Records Management Seminar. This is our third time broadcasting this particular session as a webinar, and we have more than 200 people participating today. Some of you all are here, and as David mentioned, some are out at the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh. Still others are at home or at work. And we have people attending not only from Pennsylvania, but other states, including Ohio, New Jersey, Delaware, and Virginia. So welcome to everybody. Our speakers today represent initiatives that we have underway at PHMC. We are working with our stakeholders to make record keeping more efficient for offices and more accessible to the public. As you may know, the State Archives has worked with our local government committees to allow permanent records to be kept in electronic format. This has been a huge benefit for counties, and our first speaker, Steve Levenson, will be addressing the advantages of using PDFA as a security preservation file. Another initiative that we have underway here at PHMC is our digitization effort that's being undertaken at the State Historic Preservation Office. They're in the process of moving to an online application and review process for environmental reviews, as they currently do for all their grants. As part of this effort, they're digitizing all their records within their office and increasing public access to their files. This project, which they've called PA Share, is being used by the State Archives to test how to bring PDFA records from an agency system directly into a digital archives. Today, we also have speakers in disaster mitigation and recovery. This is a theme that has obviously become more relevant today as we think about things like Ellicott City. And so we're very aware that natural disasters can severely damage communities and their cultural institutions. So in light of that, we have participated in the Cultural Resource Network here in Pennsylvania, which includes teams of professional staff who are willing to assist other cultural institutions around the state in the event of a disaster. Our State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, has received a grant from the National Park Service to help stabilize or repair historic properties damaged by Hurricane Sandy. As part of this project, the grant also funds the development of model guidance related to historic properties and to provide training and educational programs on disaster-related topics. As part of that, our archives has helped train responders in how to recover damaged records. We hope you find these presentations helpful in your work. The work that you all do is absolutely critical to your communities and to your states, and we appreciate the time you've taken out of your busy schedules to be here today to attend this training. So thank you very much for being here, and welcome.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Appreciate that. PHMC is very much about preservation and access to records. And so, again, we have that deep connection with all of you. And I want to add my thanks to hers for what you do in your communities, because it really is important. And we're here just to support your efforts as you do that. As you well know, the State Archives puts a huge emphasis on protection of records. And this afternoon's session on disaster preparedness and mitigation is one of our ongoing efforts to put an emphasis on that. We put a big emphasis on protection of records, preservation going beyond just the protection, the disaster protection, but the PDFA is one step in our effort to preserve records long term and help develop formats that will preserve records very long term. One of the things you might not know or be aware of that the Archives does is put an emphasis on access. And you may think in terms of our building access, but we are doing an awful lot in terms of digital access to records. With Ancestry.com, we have scanned 15 million records to put online, and they are free of charge if you come through the State Archives website, even though they are located at Ancestry. We have put out about another 4 million records in various venues, and we are working with the State Library. And if you go to the State Library and look at their Power Library, we have a large collection of records there, and it is growing every day. We are scanning 30,000 reels of microfilm, and we are putting it in the Power Library. So we're going to have millions of images in that library because we really are very concerned with access. And of course, we still have access to paper. We have 250 million pieces of paper in the archives, and we are designing a new building to house those 250 million pieces of paper. That is an ongoing process. We have just about finished the interim construction drawings. We're about to begin the actual construction drawings. And we hope to break ground in the next year and be into our building by 2022, late 2021. So right here in Harrisburg. So stay tuned for more of that. It is happening, and we're very, very excited about that. So part of access, as I said earlier, is making sure that we have digital formats that can be preserved for very long periods of time. And that brings us to this morning's talk about PDFA. Why PDFA? And there is no one better to speak about that, I think, than Steve Levenson. He spent 34 years working in the administrative office of the U.S. courts, in the Chief Technology Office, and he saw the need for courts and many, many other people to preserve file formats long after the software that had created them was no longer viable and no longer present. And so he helped develop PDFA. And I know many of you have questions about PDFA because of our policy on that. And so we brought the author, one of the authors of the format here to talk to you and answer your question. He has been active in developing digital content standards internationally with the International Standards Organization, or ISO. And he worked on the PDFA standard with ISO, and he currently serves as the ISO convener for PDFA. So we brought you the best, and it's time to hear him tell us about PDFA and ask questions that have been burning in your mind about it. Steve, we're very glad that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
It's good to see you.
What a great introduction. Thank you for that, that introduction. You guys don't know how lucky you are. I meet a lot of people involved in archives, how lucky you are with the people who just made those introductions that work here. They're visionary. There was a mention of the need to increase access, the public access. There's a lot of formats out there. TIFF is one of them, my favorite one to pick on, that has problems in rendering, and that you've got to supply the rendering engine in some instances in order to render the document. And PDFA is PDF, and we looked at PDF as a solution in the courts, and my longest work period, I did work for a state organization, so I'm really happy to be back to the state here. I worked for the prosecutor in Dade County for 7 years and the clerk for 3, so I've got a decade of state court experience as well. So I'm familiar with the problems on both levels, both the federal and the state experience. Unfortunately, in the state experience, the most dominant difficulty is budget. In the federal government, they can just spend whatever they want, and you've just got to be convincing and cry a lot and throw yourself on the floor, and you can get a better budget. But you can only spend what you can spend in a state, and so your difficulty, you're actually got a worse problem than the National Archives, for instance, has. But I want to start now a little bit about me, and I'm not going to go on very much here. It was already mentioned that I'm the convener. Convener is an odd term, but it just means I run the committee. I've run it now almost 20 years. I don't know, they just won't get rid of me, or nobody else will step up, I'm not sure. But I'm trying to guide this particular standard to continue to be an archive standard. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pressure from industry to want to take shortcuts that do things that work in their environment. And we continually fight to make sure that this standard meets the needs of an archival standard. When we began in this, we had several notable federal agencies that were involved. Nuclear Regulatory, I love them. Their record schedule, their records had a half-life of 20,000 years. The We had the Library of Congress as well, National Archives in that mix, and then multiple other federal agencies who had long-term record problems, as well as what we had. I also chair the standards board for the 3D PDF Consortium. Again, that's an odd name, that 3D PDF Consortium, but anybody familiar with AIM, Professional Association? AIM used to do standards. We started under AIM. AIM, as most professional organizations, had to make budget cuts, and they said, can you find a new home for standards? And these folks adopted that. I'm also on the George Mason Library Advisory Board as well, and in that, we're trying to vision the reading room of the 10, 20, 30 years from now, where that is, what it means in terms of what the students are going to bring. I think we all recognize now that people are going to bring their own technology into whatever environment that we have. There's an expectation that almost everything that we've got is going to need to be on the web. The millennials expect that. They expect searchability on it. There's a lot of changes from where we have been in the last 30 years, I think, to where we're going to go in the next 30 years. And I'm a fellow of the AIM organization, and I'm proud of that. Okay, so just to warm up, I got to go on vacation in June, loved it, went to Dublin. My wife met a lot of her relatives there, probably about 45 of them in our trip. And of course, I can't go on a trip like that without what? Going to a library, right? Oops. And so I went to the Trinity Library. And here is a panoramic view of that particular library. What a beautiful place it is. And so we're gonna take that trip in a second. But I want to take you on, I kind of put this out of order, I apologize for that. I want to take you on kind of a perspective of where we've been and what we've been doing. I'm old enough, obviously, to be from the 70s. And I remember the Kodak salesman coming in, and microfiche is the format of the future. Microfilm's the format of the future. 100-year. And they'd have a picture of some guy with a little eyepiece and a piece of film or a microform, and look at this, you can read this forever. You don't even need technology to do it. I did have the pleasure of touring the caves, National Archives caves out in Kansas. And I've got to tell you, the most notable aspect of that tour was vinegar smell. And what vinegar smell comes from, anybody know what I'm talking about? What vinegar smell comes from is that when microfilm and fiche decay, it smells like vinegar. And you know what you do with that collection? You throw it away. It is gone at that point. So, you know, we've had these promises. The salesmen have come in, 100-year, look at this, no technology. I couldn't get, in the federal courts, I couldn't get the millennials to run a microfiche machine, never mind a microfilm machine. They didn't know what it was, they didn't want to touch it. Never mind find one that you can make copies off of to do certified copies. I made a search one time for 6 months for a 64x magnifying thing, so I could have one in the office so I could look at the stuff that we had distributed. It is not come and gone. There was a James McMillan who runs the State Courts Association, just had a blog. And in that blog he said, were the courts right? Was microfilm the format of the future? And I just have to laugh. I don't want to hear that again. But 90s came along, right? We got progress. We got optical discs. Optical discs. This is it. CDs, right? Now we're cooking. We got the format of the future that's going on. If you just put your stuff on our equipment, you'll be fine. And I think we all know what's happening with that. My Mac sitting in that case there doesn't have an optical drive anymore. There are manufacturers that are dropping them. And what do we have now? We have internet, right? And we've got Wi-Fi, and so things don't need to be on a physical media. And so, you know, this is going away again. But there's hope, right? Because we're in the 2000s. So now in the 2000s, digital formats are the preferred archival format, right? We're gonna have eyeglass, but right, that's it. We're in good shape now. Well, I hope in my presentation I'm going to tell you that we're going to have to handle this one carefully. And there are some things that we're going to need to look out for as we move more into the digital environment. I think your decision on PDFA is an excellent one. It is one of the tools in the toolbox. So at the end of this presentation, I hope you agree with that. But let's go on vacation. Let's go to Trinity Library, beautiful place. That's a little hard to see on the screen, I realize that. But one of the things they had, the displays they had, was they talked about that other format that was the permanent format, paper, right? And what's happening with paper. And I really, my wife says I'm a nerd, but I fell in love with this, and this was shot through the display cases, at the top of the display cases as we went. And here they talk about physical forces, problems with paper with physical forces, handling, just handling and wear and tear on handling that you've got. This is not changing. Oh, there we go, okay. All right. But did paper have its own problems? This is a little hard to see, but do you see at the bottom where somebody took a razor blade and cut something valuable out of this piece of paper? It's gone. It is never to be retrieved again. And so you've got not only physical forces, you also got theft that is a problem in that. You've got water damage and just age. Here, this is from the 16th century, a painting that they got. Look at the damage on the lower right. It's pretty dramatic. That'll never get better again. We've got light damage. The edge of this binder, what's meant to be shown here, is on the right-hand edge of the binder. That was just exposure to ultraviolet light that began to ruin the text on this binder. Again, and in addition, I've got mold listed here. It was also mentioned that there was mold in this collection. Rodents, okay, insects. There are physical problems with paper that have been in that. Again, look at this. Here's something that they got eaten by something in there. And again, we're looking at things from the 15th century, 1500s and 1600s. It varied depending on the collection that they had. And they had a little sign explaining each one. That's why I can speak with some authority about them. Here's water. I mean, we've all had problems with water. I mean, in fact, I set up, I know you're doing a disaster preparedness thing. I put together for each of the records rooms for the courts a list of supplies that they had to have there, like sheets of plastic. So when you get that call that the stupid U.S. Marshal up on the upper floor was knocking something with his weights and knocked the water line, and there's water in your records room, at least you can run down there and throw plastic on it or something to mitigate some of the damage until the plumber shows up. Okay. Again, here's more sort of a close-up on insects and more damage onto paper. So what have we got in the toolbox to fix this? What are we going to see digital records destroyed in other ways that paper was? And that's the perspective that I wanted to bring here. And no, we've got to be careful. We have a standard out as PDF. It's been out. I think it's the longest digital record that's been out there. It started, Adobe owned it. They started with 1.0. You can currently read 1.0 files. They're very proud of that in the current standard. It has been, the company has dedicated itself to retrospectively being able to read every single prior version. That's not true in a lot of other things. We were WordPerfect people in the courts, and because WordPerfect did a good job in the legal environment, so we adopted that. And I tell you what, WordPerfect went from their 1.7 to 1.8, and all the macros went away, and fonts changed, and our collection, rendering our collection was different after that happened. And actually what happened was people held on to that 1.7 version for about 12 years. And the problem is at some point the CPU processor can't run the software that it's trying to run. So the upgrades to the hardware finally caused it to the demise of it. But it actually resulted in an alteration of the way that we viewed our documents in our collection. So we looked around 25, 30 years ago at what's there, what can be used. And we liked the features, and I'll cover some of these in more detail later, but we liked the features of the fact that it was not device dependent. That's really critical. Now, as we look at, and again, to go back to the introduction that we had, as we look at taking what we have in our collection and distributing it out to the public, we can't provision the PCs that the public has with software to render what it is that we intend to render. That's just not possible to do. And we saw that PDF with the free reader update, which was in existence at that point, was pretty neat, because we were dealing immediately, the lawyers were the public, but we were dealing immediately with the public. And so we needed them to see the document the way that we saw it, exactly. And so we looked at PDF. Now, the PDF standard, now when I say standard, this means that ISO, the International Standards Organization, which is a worldwide organization, has rules on how you describe things that you put into a standard. One of them is Adobe gave up a lot of patents and trademarks voluntarily. We worked with their legal department for almost 2 years, and they gave up a lot of things that they owned in PDF so that it could become a worldwide standard. And I think that was a really positive thing in that. But, you know, we kind of leaned on them a little bit. So they were pretty aggressive. And not only that, but when you look at software like PDF, it's not just PDF. There are lots of pieces inside PDF. XMP is an example of that, the metadata processor that shows metadata. We insisted on that become an international standard. So each of these pieces, and I think, and I'm glad to take questions if people are interested in this in more detail, but, and you'll see some of those pieces as I go through my presentation. But we're now at 1,000 pages. The specification is 1,000 pages long on how to build a correct PDF right now. Now, what does that mean for you sitting here operationally and worrying about that? You're not going to find that in any other format. You're not going to find it in Word. You're certainly not going to find it in WordPerfect. You're not going to find it in TIFF. You're not going to find it in any other format that's out there that's going to give you that fidelity. And I'm going to talk later about how we actually test that the software that says it implements actually implements, and we'll do that too. But some of those other specs that are talked about are the fonts, the ICC profiles. I mentioned XMP, and at this point there's thousands of creators for PDF. Some of them you never see because they're part of a business process, and a mainframe or a mini or whatever is actually processing in an automatic way data from a database and into a form. It may be the way you're getting your electric bill. That sort of thing would be that. So PDF is everywhere. Archival, print, all that sort of stuff. So going back to my first theme that I was trying to establish, and that is that we looked at other silver bullets that are going to be the answer. What are the problems with digital records? I think we've got to very carefully go into this and understand not only the good things, but the bad things as well in there. One of them is index pollution. We had a discussion last night at dinner about Google, people not understanding Google. People think that you can just go into any search engine, ask a question, and magically the answer you want that's going to come out. Well, in the legal world, take the word court, okay? Court was everywhere. It meant the building, it meant the guy sitting up at the bench, it meant the physical facility. I think we counted 18 meanings for the word court. You can go through, you can think you're going to do a text search and go look at court documents and go look for the word court, and you're going to find it in every single context that there is. And that's what index pollution is that you get in a specialty so many repeats of the same word, it becomes, you know, you've had 1,127 returns. Would you like to scan through these? You know, where are you then? You don't have an answer. Google does a whole lot more about who's gotten this answer before, how many people republished this data. There's a lot of factors in when you get into Google in terms of what you get when you get a software package that says you can search by text. That's nice, but you know, how do I get the text I want in the context that I want? And so there are some artificial text search engines out now. Law firms have got them with looking at e-discovery, and they can look at trends and try to get context and so on and so forth. Very expensive. And it's not here for us to consume it. It's a very specialty environment. But index pollution is a problem with digital records. You can't just dump things in a digital junkyard and think that you can search via text and get an answer that you want directly, or maybe even be accurate. The infrastructure is an issue. There are storage device failures. We've had disk crashes. You've got to plan in your systems architecture for what am I going to do when this fails? Not what am I going to do if this fails. What am I going to do when this fails? Where's my backup, and what are my expectations for this particular content? If it's historical research, it's got a lower priority. You could be out a day. If it's court records that are needed immediately, we had a secondary server that was running somewhere in the country outside of the earthquake zone and the fire zone and the hurricane zone and whatever was challenging that particular court in another region you could just switch to. So you've got to think about, is one enough? Do I need two? What if the storage device goes down? What are the expectations? Because everybody's going to tell you, particularly IT people, oh, you're going to save a lot of money. Well, with some of that money you save, you need to also say, what's my mission and how do I accomplish that? File corruption is an interesting one. I mentioned to you that in the federal courts we had an alternative data site, and when we issued when an attorney filed electronically, we ran a checksum. Everybody's familiar with checksum? You're counting the bits and the characters in the document. We ran a checksum, and we sent an email to the attorney and said, the opposing party in your case just filed something. Here's the document, and here's the checksum. So that checksum, you could come back and take that and compare that to the one that's at the courthouse anytime anybody presented you with a copy. So, for instance, let's say, and we've had some creative lawyers that have done this, let's say they've got a judgment for $1,000 and they make it $10,000. Just throw a little zero in there, right? And then they present it to somebody. How do they know that's the original digital record? And how do they know it's authentic? And so they can come back and either with that digital copy or come back and actually view the copy online at the courthouse from anywhere in the world and say, oh, it doesn't compare to the one that's here. Somebody's pulling a fast one here. And so this is not an authentic record that I'm going to pay $10,000 because it's been presented to me. But there's an issue with all media out there of bit rot. Now, bit rot is a term you're probably not going to hear, and your computer engineers can certainly explain it to you, and they've been involved in it. But basically, this whole thing gets down to a bunch of ones and zeros that are on some sort of recording device somewhere that you get to somehow, right? And there's so many ifs in that equation. But you've got a bit that's standing up this way that's representing a 1, and it lays down and it represents a 0, right? And at times they get tired, and they're nothing but a magnetic force that makes that alteration either on the magnetic tape or on the DASD or the disk, and it can fail. So one of the things that the courts do, the federal courts do with their collection, which is now probably about 1.8 billion or so records at this point, active records, is that they run through courts periodically, and they run the checksum. And are you still right? Are you still the way we put you away? And if that answer is no, you go to your alternative system, you run it over there, and then you drag it back and you replace it. And so that's another example, and that's a good working example of where 2 is better. I mean, not only does that serve you that there's an earthquake in San Francisco this afternoon, and they just switched the URL to the backup site, and nobody knows they're down except for them. And they can be down as long as they want. People can still file cases. People can still get copies. You don't know. The public doesn't know that you've got that. But rendering is probably, and I'm going to move on to rendering issues. Rendering is probably the most difficult of these things. Again, and I don't mean to get down on anybody ever use WordPerfect here? No? Probably in college, right? WordPerfect had a really odd behavior, and that is every time you changed printers, it changed your format based on the printer. And so we very early realized that rendering wasn't automatic, and this wasn't This wasn't something that you could depend on. Now, in the court environment, and I share this with you because it may be in the environments that you're working in, and you may not have fully recognized it. In the court environment, format is content. Now, how does that work? You've got a party who generally attorneys are extremely verbose, so judges put limits on them. You got 50 pages, you got 100 pages, depending on the level of the court, and so they'll file a brief, and in that brief they'll use their pages up, and the opposing party will read it, and there'll be 4 pages starting at page 7 that is their argument, their legal argument. Are they going to repeat that and give up part of their pages by repeating their argument? They don't. What they say is, as the opponent stated on the bottom of page 7, this is what's wrong with that. Okay, they go on with their answer of what happened. Well, if we render that document to them, and that argument's no longer on the bottom of page 7, it's on the top of page 8 or 9 or back at 6, we've lost content. So in this particular case, that's a very unusual use case, but format can affect content. And so one of the requirements that you've got as you look at systems that you purchase is, what are my requirements? And is one of them formatting? I mean, do I have to have this? Do I want this exactly the way the public gave it to me? Is that important in my workflow to do that? In the legal world, I argue it was, okay? The other is software just gets out of date. In the PDFA committee, we defined software in terms of legacy software, any version that was the 3rd version after in the environment. In other words, not the current version or the last version, but go back 3 versions. And we found, our experience was, there's lots of trouble out there in that. We'll talk about fonts later, but fonts, anybody here know that in Windows, the base font in Windows has changed every version? That you've got a different set of fonts in each one? So you can't rely on a common font, and most of you in operating in a PC are using Windows-based fonts when you're creating stuff. So you didn't know you were using something that's not going to be there in the next version, and so rendering would be affected by that. DRM is an issue, and we went as seriously as we could. Digital rights management is a real issue in any collection. And so, speaking as a government employee, I didn't want to pay any money to anybody for the collection that we, the government, had. Now, you might say, well, that's crazy, Steve. Who would ever do that? Well, there's a compression algorithm, where you take a file and you make it smaller, called LibLZ or LZW. I don't know if anybody's heard about it. The patent is run on it, which was fortunate. But before the patent ran on it, the company that owned it, Sperry Univac, Burroughs had it and Sperry Univac had it. I don't know the succession, but somebody had it, and they both went into bankruptcy. And a lawyer came in and bought the assets and sold it to a company. And the new company said to a couple of very big organizations, hey, you're using my LZW, pay up. I want a penny every time you render a document. And they said, well, you're crazy. That was in the public domain. We were never told that this had any because Burroughs and Burroughs never claimed any sort of proprietary. Well, it went to court, and guess what? They lost, and the individual who was told to pay up paid up, and so they paid up for like 2 or 3 years until the patent expired, and so that it's gone now. So we don't have that. But the problem is that DRM rights on fonts, which I personally went to the Microsoft company, I went to Adobe, and I said, you've got to, in your uniform licensing agreement, you have got to say that the secondary holder of fonts is held harmless from your rights in terms of claiming that. So what do I mean? I mean, you as an archive, for instance, you've got an agency that owned Word. They used Word's fonts. They submitted that document to you. You're just holding it and displaying it, and somebody comes after you and says, hey, we own those fonts. We want a penny every time you do that. Well, we were able to get both Microsoft and Adobe to waive those rights for the secondary holder, the archive function. That's why it's not come up like LZW, which we were all scared about, because we're thinking, oh my gosh, we're committing all these court files to this. We can't have the public charged, or we can't pay to render this stuff, and so we were able to deal with that. So why PDFA? Okay, at the end of the day, when you make a PDFA and you call your directory program up and you look at it, it says PDF, and there's a reason for that. It is PDF, and so we said, in fact, my first stupid idea that I went to Adobe with was, can I have a profile that I can load on my website, and in that profile it would set Acrobat to the settings that I want in order to assist in this document becoming archivable. And they thought about it, and then smarter people prevailed and said, you know, you could make this a standard. And I said, what's that? And so that started the whole thing, and that's why we got into the standards world. My idea was it would have worked, but only worked for one company, and I wasn't really willing to tell the lawyers they had to use Acrobat. We were exempt from, it was a Paper Reduction Act in the federal statute, and the Paper Reduction Act says that you can't, funny that it's buried in here, but you can't require the public to spend money to view your records. That's federal, okay? Now, we were exempt from it because we were the judiciary, so we could have done it, but we tried to comply the best we could to all of the executive rules that were out there, and to behave in that way a little bit better. And so we said, well, we can't do that. We can't make them just go to one company. They're right. We'll go to a standard. So there's thousands of people now that are complying with the current standard that's out there. Now, over there on the left side, why a standard version of it? It's sometimes a little too flexible. It asks you to do things that you shouldn't do. We actually had the bankruptcy court in Alexandria, Virginia, go in and use JavaScript, start to store PDFs and use JavaScript in it for the documents that they were submitting. They had, bankruptcy is like an accounting exercise, and they had these sheets that talked about, here's the assets, here's the list of assets, here's the money, here's the total. And when you went into their site and you pulled that document out, if you had Acrobat, you could start changing the numbers and print it out the way you wanted to do it. Well, that's not what we want in our collections. We want stability. We want that the way that document got filed is the way we want that document to present. That's the authenticity issue again that we've got with that. So that flexibility to be able to add JavaScript in is great in some workflows. It works great for people who want to use it, but you don't want it in your archive. So you're beginning to say, you know, there's things I want turned off inside of this standard and inside of this software, and I want to have it turned off automatically, because I'm not into training the public and coaching them on, oh, you just bought a new copy of the software, what is it? Oh, here's the list of things you got to turn on and off. I mean, that would just be a nightmare if we needed to do that. PDF does it for you automatically. PDFA does it for you automatically. Another thing that we added, there's an ability in PDF to either include you can include the whole font set of the font that you're using, or the subset of it that was used. So if you only use 20 characters out of the font set and no wingdings or anything else, it's a smaller collect that you do. So one of the things that PDFA does is PDFA, going back to that rendering issue, where you can't depend on, you've got, the font's got to be consistent when you do the rendering. Going back to that, the fonts are included in PDFA. If you started with a non-graphical image, and you can create PDFA from scans, so it's not in that version, but it's in the version of, you've got a word processor or some other software or even straight into PDF in Acrobat, for instance. When you save it, it will go out and collect those fonts, and those fonts are included in that file. So again, I'm talking to the right group here. As archivists in an archive, how would you like to have to coordinate that you've got all these files, and those files have an external reference to a font set, and you've got to go out and reference that font set and keep all that in sync, or you don't display your records properly. That to me looked like a nightmare of a future. And so self-contained was the way that we decided to go. And that's one of the things that PDF-A does as well. By the way, we're going to make these slides available. I'm not going to sit here and read all the slides to everybody because they didn't supply any coffee and you'll fall asleep. So I will, if you want to go back to these, if this is of interest to you, you can go back to these slides. I'm just trying to take the highlights of them. We already talked about assuring predictable appearance and security and signatures. Now, I actually took the body of this content from one of my earlier slide sets. It could be 12 years old here, where we were talking about this stuff. The word signature has expanded tremendously in the world. Signature is very confusing. There's the feature. In fact, this is a good story to tell to this group. When we were looking at doing digital records, the biggest thing that we got wrapped around the axle about was signature. Now, what do we mean by signature? The ink signature on a piece of paper, right? That signed the deal. That said this was approved. This passed through some authority. This is final. This is how you prove that this is the document that's there. And so we called in a lot of judges into a group to do a brainstorming session. Signatures came up. And this old judge from Georgia, the 11th Circuit, listened to the discussion. And he said, "It's time for me to get some coffee, so I thought I'd interrupt you all and tell you what the real story is. This is what signatures are." And he went on about how there weren't signatures 100 years ago. That'd be 120 years ago now. There weren't signatures. That's the old, put your X here. A lot of people didn't write. He said they got a notary, but you don't have to have a notary if you put /x/ and the signature, and that can be, and this was an ancient circuit judge. That can be an ASCII script, and we all just mouths dropped to the floor, and that was the end of the discussion for us. So you actually find in the federal, all of those documents that I referenced, they're all signed with /S/ for signature and a typed signature. People have been actually sentenced to death by federal judges with /S/ and not an ink signature on a document. The authenticity, and I hope that you take this away, authenticity is not necessarily a requirement of the file format. When you say I put this in PDF, PDF-A or PDF, you have not automatically authenticated that document. You still got to look at workflows around it. And by that I mean like duplicate copies and those sorts of functions. But the signature part of it, we solved that. That's how we do electronic commerce. That was the dam that broke, and then from then on it was full speed ahead to digitize all of these records. I already talked a little bit about reliable appearance and not having the external files. We actually went to the what is it, GPO, General Government Printing Office, Federal Government Printing Office, and asked them if they would keep a federal set of base fonts so that we would get around that problem. They weren't playing, and they weren't going to get into that. So we tried to get them to do DOIs too. If anybody knows about DOIs, they claimed they were the government digital center, but they're not. But anyway, that's another whole story. So the predictable appearance structure for content reuse is a big issue in any workflow, and as we get better and better in the digital world used to mean you put it on a platen and you take a picture of it, and now you're digital. And that definition has grown tremendously to be that there's an expectation that there's extractable ASCII text in content, and that extractable, whether you do zones and look at the registration number or whatever as stuff flows through, there are higher and higher expectations of reuse of this particular content. In PDF, the transparency and the renderability of it has been assisted the way that the software has been been put together. I covered these just because I always talk about them, the transparency, the self-documenting. One of the things that I'll mention here that I don't have in this slide set is anybody here, amateur photographers, take pictures and put them in a computer and look at them. Ever noticed in the directory structure, it'll tell you you shot this with a Canon E something, and it was a 1.5 f-stop and blah, blah, blah. You know that data? When you look at your picture, do you see that data? The reason you don't is it's in something called XMP. XMP is stored in the file, but it's not in the display portion of the file for pictures. The photography committee of ISO was a component of PDFA. And one of the things that they suggested that we do is we make XMP more extensible. Now, when I mean suggested, this was the Library of Congress that was really leading this charge. We had some great people from there, and they said, you know, in our business, we're not the collecting agency. We get this stuff second and third and fourth hand, and so you get a collection of 5 counties in Pennsylvania, and somebody says, wow, that's a really interesting collection. That was everywhere that Joe Smith went, right? So we're going to get the Joe Smith collection, and we're going to put that together. Well, when you do that, the metadata that you need to prove provenance on that document is supplemented, and it's not that it was taken in York County and by a photographer named Smith. It's now that it was taken in York County, the photographer was Smith, and it was added to a regional collection because it talks about Joe Smith, and we're making a Joe Smith collection. So you've got that provenance data that needs to be added in there. We made XMP extensible so that there was a place for the archivists to put their information, because in an archive collection, we may very well, as government agencies, collect this stuff multiple times. Your records management people may bring it into a 25, 30-year archive and hold it. And then your archivist may say, I want that collection. I want to move that into my archives collection. And at each and every one of those stages, the provenance data and the metadata relative to those things was not part of the original. And so there is provision in PDF now, because PDF has grown up to accept a lot of the things that we wanted to do in the latest version of it. But PDF is able to extend your metadata. I'm going to talk about another version of PDF, PDFA, called -3, which allows you to take an arbitrary digital object and attach it to the PDFA. Where that is that we had a lot of archivists who said, I'm not getting rid of that Word file. It was created in Word. I'm rendering it in Word. Word is what I'm keeping, and there is no way I'm converting that to PDF. Why are you even proposing this? Well, what PDFA allows them to do is to render it in PDF to make it a little bit more permanent, and attach the Word file to the PDF. Now, this is something you can do in regular PDF. In PDFA, the magic is that the renderer, the reader, knows that it's a -3, and it won't render it at the time that the person looks at the document. They'll just see the PDF. And when on the very bottom of it, there's going to be a little note that if you want, there are attachments as a paperclip. There are attachments, and if you want to look at the attachments, you're welcome to. But when they look at it, what's going to happen? They're going to have the version of Word that this thing was created in sitting on their workstation, or what are they going to see? Can't render, right? That's what they're going to get. So very quickly, this stuff is going to drop away. But we've seen lots of excitement about in the archival world of using -3. Europe has sort of led the cause, because in Europe, the European Commission adopted ISO standards as the law. So there, the default is, if you're going to do something in actually in any process, but let's say in IT, you got to look at an ISO standard first. If there is none, you proceed on and do what you can do. But if there is an ISO standard, you have to justify why you're not using it. So it's not that you have to use it, but that you've got to justify why this documented process is not good enough. Why is it your process that's different in it? So there's been huge adoption of PDFA in Europe for that reason, but also South Africa and also China and also South America. And I think at this point the count is, it was mentioned, hello to Virginia, my home state out there, that there were several states that were listening to this. There are efforts at a lot of legislatures to mandate this for the same reason. Why allow IT people to sort of arbitrarily pick something if there's something out there already that everybody's going to be using? And there is, I'll tell you, there's strength in numbers. The discussion we had last night, you know, I'm not going to stand up here or anywhere and tell you I got the 100-year standard. The way this technology is moving, who knows? But I tell you what I do have. I have a well-documented, soundly designed, and well-engineered format that when the new thing comes, whoever's going to do that job to go to the new format will understand it. And that the conversion errors from PDFA into wherever it goes is going to be a lot less than people guessing how to, you know, what header did you use in TIFF? You know, I don't understand this. You know, is that multi-page? You know, all those, I'm talking to the propeller heads here, I'm sorry. But, you know, those are the issues. So, and that's the adoption slide down there. Now, obviously, it's non-proprietary. We used to get all the time, oh, but Adobe owns it. I'll tell you what Adobe does own. Adobe owns TIFF, and Adobe's given up on TIFF. And one of the things I do is I lecture to the Property Records Association a lot, PRIA, and I'm pushing them to go to A because they're all TIFF people. And Adobe not only owns TIFF, and think about it, if Adobe goes bankrupt, which any company can do, or just sells off its patent to TIFF, we could very well find somebody showing up at somebody's door and asking for money again. I mean, it opens you to that vulnerability of DRM again. And so, and I've got statements from their engineers that I can't publish the name, but and these are engineers that know we're not doing anything with this anymore. We're not updating it. And so it is what it is. Now the problem with it is that the last two versions of Windows doesn't have a TIFF reader. Versions before that did. It had a standard TIFF reader. So what are we going to do? We're going to provision our users with a TIFF reader in addition. You know, come to my website. Here's it. Oh, you couldn't read it. Download this software, right? That's just more hassle to try to do that. So there's minimal restrictions on facilitating long-term preservation, and I hope if anything, if this group does anything today, that you think holistically about the collection point with the citizen or the agency that creates the document all the way to the archive, so that archivist who receives that document, you've populated to the best of your ability your XMP, or you've attached what's necessary to document. Right now, the National Archives, even though a lot of them knew this, right now the National Archives, they are in huge research projects with these digital junkyards that got dumped on them from agencies, and it's like, what's this? You know, and somebody understood it at some time, but clearly they don't. They don't know the context. So you begin to lose the value of the record in dramatic ways, if not totally declaring it junk and just not having it in your collection, unless you think holistically from beginning to end, and you do what you can at each stage to do that. You know, this has always been my problem with project management. Project management has all sorts of money to pay programmers and set up workstations, first workstations, and all that sort of stuff. They've got no money to say, your records people, and I was the judiciary records officer for a while, that's why I can complain. The records people, they don't get any money for keeping the thing for 30 years. You know, where's that? And who helps us in that? It doesn't happen. But I think that if we insist, if we can get on the design teams and we can assist up front, this is a great step to go to PDFA. If we can insist up front that we at least have a version a format that we can deal with later, that we can understand, that we can dissect, that we can use in subsequent workflows, will certainly be ahead. So the objectives from 2005, we're really going back a ways here, but I just wanted to go over a couple of these. The accurate rendering, of course, we've got that, and the incorporation of the marginalia, and that was the XMP that I discussed with you. And now with the -3, with the ability, if there's some sort of notes that are made on this in the process of the workflow, that you can do that. But there is alternative text also in PDF, and if developed properly, you can put alternative text and do the equivalent of marginalia. By that, you know what I mean, that somebody wrote notes in it, I like this section, I don't like this section. That sometimes is of record value when you're dealing with it. And of course, the behavior of the reader, we've continued to have the support of Adobe with the free reader out there. And of course, we're cynical as heck, so we always said, what happens if they go away? But there are a lot of readers out there right now, and they're all complying with the standard. And we wrote standards into the ISO standard about the reader to try to cover that. Now, what is it that a file format doesn't do? And we just need to talk about this a little bit to understand what we need to do that's extra. Hardware migration. If you've got a format like PDF, you don't have to worry because it's hardware agnostic. But if you've got other file formats that are really worried about 8-bit and 16-bit and 32-bit and 64-bit and all that technologies we've rolled through, that is something the file format doesn't have to do. That's what your policies have to do in terms of how you input the files and process them. The OS is the same thing. I've seen the operating systems, particularly with versions of Windows, affect the rendering of electronic documents. And you've got to be very careful when you design something. You pick it that doesn't just run on a Mac or doesn't just run in Windows, and some assurance for that. And I'm not a SharePoint fan, by the way, in the back there, for that reason. But anyway, and your document management systems problems are that you still have to track your documents. Versioning is not automatic in a format. It was proposed, somebody made a proposal to the committee to include some versioning issues, but the problem is that Joe creates it on his machine over here, and Mary creates it over here, and then they compare the two and they change, and versioning just, the format, you can't make the format keep track of multiple people in multiple places with multiple copies. It's something that if that's of value to the organization, you have to do it externally. Digital rights management, I've told you, we did what we could and tried to use the bully pulpit of the federal judiciary, to tell you the truth, to get a lot of companies to kind of give stuff up that they were doing. My other alternative was to go get legislation, but doing that in Congress is much more difficult task than getting your two primary companies to lead the way and then move from there. But digital rights management is a problem with pictures that are in these documents, and there may need to be policies and procedures that say that you have got to describe somewhere that this is a photo owned by Joe, and publication rights are not there, and make sure the little copyright symbol or something is embedded, or at least it's back in XMP, so that you don't get accused of improper behavior with digital records, digital objects that have copyrights or other IP rights that are associated with them. I did a little consulting with the Library of Congress, and I'll tell you what, that's one of their biggest issues. One of the hardest problems is IP, and they do. The way they have to display things is crazy. The donor agreements generate lots of behaviors that they perform, because the donors and they've had to make their own decision. One of them was Margaret Mead gave her pictures to the library, and in the pictures, I didn't know this, but she'd gone to Polynesia, and she took a lot of pictures of a lot of children, and they were all naked. And in the United States, pictures of naked children is kiddie porn. and possession of it will get you a long term in a gated community. And so you've also got to make your own decisions about your content that may, in one context, be fine, but in another context, when you're giving this out to the public, may not be fine in what you do. They also had donors that put holds for 30 years on different things while they're writing a book. Here's my diary, but the last 3 chapters, I'm still doing a book. You can't display that. You can display this. So it causes all sorts of concerns. Fortunately, I hope everybody sitting in this room is dealing with government documents. Although in the courts, we did have a great number of exhibits that weren't government created, and we had to be careful on what we did. So where is PDFA relative to PDF? And I hope this graphic is big enough. I hope this graphic kind of gives you an impression, and I'm going to run down these rather quickly. I'm happy with questions to dive a little bit deeper. But there are multiple subsets to PDF right now that are up in ISO thing, and I just want to bring them to your attention so you know that they're there. The main one is PDF ISO 32000. That's the number that ISO gave it. ISO loves to deal with funny numbers. You'll notice my slides don't have them on it because it just confuses people. But I've got to tell you that ISO 32000 was Adobe's 1.7 version of Acrobat. That company gave that version, and then they ISOized it so that the language was standard. And then actually about 6 of their engineers spent 6 months going through every single paragraph of it and saying, okay, we said that was a good idea, but what's the adoption in the marketplace? Oh, nobody did that. They did this. They changed the words. So it not only was ISOized in terms of the clarity of the words that were there, but it was also brought up to date as to what the market was actually doing, what people were really doing. You might say, well, where would you make a decision like that? Let me tell you, if you ever want to buy me, let's say 5 beers, I'll talk to you about color rendition someday. I mean, my eyes glaze over in my committees when color comes up. You know, the color changes based on the size you display it at. I mean, it is crazy. So, you know, those are places where, in fact, the greatest variant of PDFA was color rendering in Europe, and that got fixed. But anyway, so there's 32,000. There's another one called X, and X is for the publication community. Actually, X preceded us. I have to give X credit for wanting to sort of be a subset. X pays a lot of attention to color and printing presses. So I don't know what publisher anymore. Time Life, let's say. I'm dating myself. Everybody's gone bankrupt. You've got a publisher like Time Life. The author authors their artwork and content in PDFX. PDFX actually tells the printer. It goes to the printer and it says to the printer, are you printing on glossy? Are you printing on newsprint? Are you going to the screen? Where are you going? And based on that, it sets the color based upon the way that the user defined the color. So you can, when you see that advertisement in Life magazine of the cherry red Volkswagen for 1970, it is the cherry red they intended. And that same in the newspaper, it's that cherry red they intended, no matter where it's at. So there was a great need in the publication world for color. Fortunately, color hasn't introduced itself a lot in our public records yet, and I always thought I was so grateful for that. But there is color in it, and PDFA renders color in device-dependent color. Okay, and what does that mean? That means that if you say red, and the printer, the electronic printer that you're printing it on, understands it's red, it'll print it in that red. So if somebody has a memo and it says all the red highlights I disagree with, okay, and that's record content of the color, that what was their value to it? Well, they highlighted in red all the stuff that they thought was illegal, right? And so this person should have known it. So that's got content, both evidentiary and records content that's associated with it. It doesn't matter if it's pink, it's still red. So in our documents, we haven't really cared if it's a ruby red or if it's just red, and it can be whatever the device wants it to be. And that's what PDF-A does. Now, if you need more, there's PDF-X for you, okay? If there's a thing, and you may have art stuff that you want to render completely accurately, that you're putting on the web, and X would be the way to go. These are all close cousins. When you have gone to the trouble to get to X, you got the equivalent of A. So you haven't given anything up by going to X. But X will allow you to do the blue, red, green actual specification of what the intent is on this particular color. So that exists. I just want you to know that. I've talked a lot about A here. There's E for engineering. A product came up that revolutionized engineers called CAD, Computer Assisted Design. And the problem with CAD is CAD was dependent upon, and you probably have an architectural bureau somewhere in the state that may be concerned with this, but CAD devices work as long as you keep that CAD device. And when you go to brand B on another CAD, you don't have it. And so there was a great demand of saying, isn't there a neutral format we can get to that we can share among CAD machines, and particularly reuse of content? Plus, our long-term problems, the architectural people have them too. If you build a building and somebody needs to get to the architectural drawings and understand why that 60-year-old escalator isn't working, they need to get to those drawings. And where were those drawings before? They were on paper. But now where are they going to be? They're probably going to be in some sort of handheld device about this size that they're looking at that they need to get to. And so again, the world is changing. E is addressing that. E wanted to be A, and I was the problem that they didn't join it because they keep insisting on 3D rendering. And 3D rendering is really nice. You know, 3D rendering, you put up a picture of a house and you spin it and you see the east side and you see the west side, et cetera. And so you can look at an object all around it. Well, there wasn't a long-term codex or piece of software that decoded 3D. 3D was the Wild West. So they have come back. They now have a standard for it. We are considering merging E and A together. We've got some big companies behind E. Boeing, Airbus. If you think about it, aircraft industry has a long-term problem too because all of their manufacturing data, all of their drawings of an aircraft have to be retained by them and accessible for the life of the aircraft. Well, we were just down in Key West last year, and I saw a DC-3 flyover, and that aircraft, I think, was built in the mid-40s. So, you know, that's a long time to go back in a digital record and have to have accuracy to explain the crash or the part or whatever. But E also allows the ability of reuse. This is where they're thinking. Boeing laid out 7 places that they were going to use the same drawing. And among those places, I won't bore you with the whole list, but among those places, one of them was marketing, that they wanted to show, reason you buy this Boeing aircraft is look at the quality of our brake system, right? So they want to show the same system. And at some point, some poor 21-year-old sailor is going to be on a pitching deck in a rainstorm and say, is that cotter pin in right? Looking up at a landing gear and trying to fix a problem and in a hurry to do so, and is going to need that rendered on a device. Now, do you want it? Do you want that cotter pin position to be the latest when they make the change at Boeing on reversing that position or changing that brake system? Or do you want it to be the old one? Or you want to have version problems with it? Their changes will flow through. So it'll always be, every single reuse will flow through at the same time. I find that kind of exciting. That's a pretty good thing. So we're working with E, and we may have 3D at some point. UA may be of more interest to you. UA is universal access. Somebody help me with this. In Pennsylvania, 503, the Accessibility Act for the blind. What's that called here? You have one? Do you have to render on your website so the blind can render? No? Yeah, it's a federal requirement, and in most documents containing a font, it's not a problem. 90% of the site deprived people or sight challenged people, I got to be politically correct, I don't know whatever it's called, people can't see well and need a machine to help them. They need a font. That's the key thing. They can't have a graphic. You can't have a scan. They got to have a font, because a machine's got to read the font, and then it'll read it to them, or it'll enlarge it, whatever it is that they're asking the machine to do. And so a lot of this world is just about properly putting the fonts in. Well, PDFA does that. PDFA requires a font. The used font set has got to be embedded. And so you've kind of got that with a step with A. But where it goes different is there's something called read order and alternative text, which are two things that they expand on. Now, picture for yourself, you look at a magazine, and it's got 2 columns on it, and about halfway down the first column is a picture of a man sitting in a rowboat with a dog in the front, okay? Now, when we experience that content, we can look at it and we go, okay, we're going to have to read down this column. Obviously, they want us to look at this picture, and then we're going to finish the column, and we start on the next column when we come down. Reading machines don't know that. Reading machines are extremely dumb. So there's a thing called read order. It says start at this paragraph, go to here, go to the picture, start at the next paragraph on the bottom, called read order. So UA has gotten, and a lot of this has been absorbed in main PDF, but the specialty stuff has not. Special tools so that people can, if you're responsible for creating content that has to do this, the UA standard has made it possible so that whatever you use, I'll just say Acrobat for not to name a bunch of companies. You're using Acrobat to do that. You can go in and set your read order. You can say, what is it? And then you can change it if it needs to be. And then when you get to that picture, what's the experience that's expected by the author when you encounter that picture? Well, they want you to see that there's a man sitting in a calm lake with a dog and got a fishing rod out, right? Alternative text will say that. It'll say those exact words, that what the content conveyance is intended from the graphic that it encounters. And when you do a rollover, or the machine knows to start when you get to that point, when you do a rollover with your mouse, you see a little box pop up, and it says, this is a picture of a man sitting in a rowboat, etc. Okay? And so that's called alternative text, required in the UA world, so that the individual who's sight impaired, when they encounter that graphic, they get the author intent for what that graphic's going to convey. And so the machine will read that to them, those words. And so, and what we'll do next, in read order, go to the next paragraph and start again, and to go through the document, so that they can experience the textual experience. Now, this is probably far afield from most government documents, and I realize that, but there are needs for it, and there are more and more calls for the ability, as you go out and do more publishing, to do universal access, or the ability for machines to do this. I handled all those complaints for the federal judiciary, and we would have some smarty system manager go to their website and throw a scanned version of their rules of court up, and it just killed everything, and you just do stupid things like that. And so, but all those machines can read PDF, and so if you're in the PDF family, you've made the commitment to A, or just PDF itself, that's one less worry that you've got in there. The Germans, as the Germans do, said PDF's too complicated. This is, at the time they said it, there's an 800-page spec, and we don't like it. It's too heavy. We want to create a lightweight one, and they wrote VT. You'll never encounter VT. It's used in industry and in Europe, and it's used where probably nobody ever touches the document. Data is being exchanged and formats are being created. But remember at the beginning of my session, it's the law. You've got to have it in PDFA format. So they use VT to kind of clean things up a little bit. There's an upcoming standard, and this is, thank you. This is part of my this is part of my prejudice about TIFF, and that is that even the scanning industry, the copier industry, is looking to dump TIFF. And they went out and they got a version of PDF created called PDF/R for raster, a raster version of a document. It's definitely graphical. If you don't know the word raster, just think graphical. and raster versions, and there's lots of complicated stuff, and go get a propeller head if you ever want to go to sleep and talk about the way it does the rendering and the mathematical, anyway. And it has to do with, you make it this big, it still looks good. But anyway, PDFR is coming to a scanner near you in probably 2 years. It's not here now because they're waiting for 32,000-2 to flush out. It was up for a world vote, and the U.S. voted no to hold it because it references -2. And what we tried to do with all these standards is everything is 32,000 except for these things, like fonts are mandatory. So we try to keep our standards shorter. I think we're still 40 pages, but keep it shorter and not be redundant and just refer to the main one. So I just got the 10-minute one. What I've got remaining here, and I'm going to flash through these slides real quick, and not read them at all, is just some challenges that we had to PDF. I know you guys are in the middle of implementation, and I thought it would be helpful to talk about. And one of them I covered. Well, file size. There are some vendors that are making actually PDFA files smaller than regular files. There are ways to do that. Obviously, if you take nothing else away from here, PDFA is not something you just say, drop down the box and say PDFA. It really would behoove you to think about your workflow and what you need and what the values are on that. There's lots of people that are available to help you out with that. These are some FAQs. Everybody has access to this slide pack, by the way, and you can go back over these FAQs as you want. But I want to talk about the future for a little bit. I covered this just a second ago, but these are some resources here. There's 2 pages of this. These, hopefully, URLs all work. The one that's labeled, the first one there, you can see it says YouTube, and the next one says slides. These are presentations of people. Most of them are, there's a PDFA association, about 220 companies in Europe that are focused on nothing more than making PDFA part of a workflow or make it better. It's their special sauce as to why things are better there. But this has both YouTube videos, most of them are an hour in length, or slides from a presentation. I do warn you, almost everybody has a thick accent, usually German or Swiss, that are doing the slides, but those are the people that are doing this promotion. They did have a U.S., about 6 months ago, they did have a U.S. Session at the National Archives. We did it in their auditorium, and all these people that did these presentations were there, and they kind of take their show around the world. That's those 2 pages. But what I wanted to leave with, and leave a little time for questions, is that one of the contributions the National Archives made to our project is they said, Steve, this is all well and good, but if we don't know that the software developer is adhering to PDFA, what good is it? What if there's variance in adherence? We've all seen standards where people write software and it's junk. And at that time, there were 2,000 PDF writers, and most of them were junk. And by the way, just as a side note, we knew they were junk. One of our courts was a bankruptcy court. And in bankruptcy court, we were responsible for sending what was called noticing. And so in Pennsylvania here, I forget where it is, but not Thurmont. It might have been Thurmont. No, north of Thurmont, because it's Pennsylvania. There's a vendor who prints every single notice and puts it in an envelope. And so we know the problems of rendering PDF. And you've got everybody in the world creating it off of this junk junk stuff. The funniest rendering problem that we had was we had a district judge who called up a document in a case, and there was German on the screen. And the defendant in the criminal case happened to have been a German terrorist. And so he immediately pushed the panic button, and in rushes the marshals. What's this? Of course, they look at it, and nobody spoke German. And so they start calling out for experts to find out what it is. Well, the bottom line is that the reader and the renderer that was there had embedded some advertising for a printing company and said, use us for the best print job, is all that it said. But by coincidence, it happened to be German and so on and so forth. So how do you know that your renderer, your PDF creator is actually doing what it's doing? Well, the European Union actually took it seriously. They spent 30 million euros, and they went out to a company. The web address is actually at the top of the screen, verapdf.org, and they have open source software that they distribute to manufacturers who can test that your PDFA software adheres to the standard. And so VeraPDF is out there. So in conclusion, what we've got is we've got PDFA, which is an ISO standard, in other words, an engineered specification open to the public, based on 32,000, which is an open engineered standard of how these files are created, overlooked by software that tests to say, are you actually adhering to that standard that you said you're doing? And that actually is an industry unique to have that combination. So with that is my last slide, but I got the 5 minute, which I feel bad about. We have questions out here before we call for them off of the web. Sir?
I have a propeller head question for you.
Make it short because I got to repeat it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does PDFA incorporate any capability for checksumming?
PDF, part of the signature package, oh, I'm sorry. Does PDFA contain any provision for checksumming? Checksumming, for those that aren't acquainted with that, is that you run a digital signature, or when you are the ingestion organization for something digital, you can actually go and say, how many characters are, this is a simple version of it, how many characters are there in this document? And then you save that number. You can either save it internally in the document, or you can save it externally. We in the court saved it externally, and because we didn't want to alter what the lawyer gave us, which is a decision you've got to make. And the provision, the automatic provision inside PDF is called digital signature. And what it does is it actually just does that. It runs a checksum over the entire document. And in Reader, they actually have a little feature where you go in and it'll have an X that says this is not the original version because you stored it in with a digital signature, or it'll have a green check mark and say this is identical to. So you can have Reader do the work for you for the checksum. You'll have to require your agencies to digitally sign it, either at the time that they do the transfer to you, or in their workflow somewhere that they do it. Now that's a self-contained digital signature that's in there, or you can run your own and do it externally. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
No one else? No one else is brave enough? Oh, good.
Yeah, about ISO standards. So all these ISO standards are enforceable by like any government agency or regulatory authority is demanding that your PDF should have that standard or not?
Tell me if I recap this correctly. Is there any organization that can mandate the accurate use of ISO standards? Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. In Europe, yes, it's the law there that ISO standards are there, and that's been a good development area for a lot of our software and techniques that are in there. Because in the U.S., no, it's sad, but no, there is not in the U.S. Any enforcement for that. That's why in the beginning of my presentation I said there are state legislatures that are looking at this, or archival organizations that are looking at this, that are looking to mandate it. I have worked with the state of Florida. They have mandated it in their courts, and they're going with it. To me, it just makes sense. I hope we left a tool for the archivists to have a tool in their toolbox that would do a lot of what they need. But again, I hope through my presentation you understand there's still a lot more work to do. It's not a silver bullet, but it is a good, healthy tool to start with. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I have followed. Like the U.S. Congress of Library or a National Archivist is trying to implement or have their standard in the place.
The National Archives for all federal public records requires submission in PDF-A at the time of transfer. They don't require it at the time of holding the document. And I see that as a prescription for a giant mess coming in about 2025. But they don't listen to me, so what can I say? Any other questions? Well, that's good. We got any on the phone?
I think we need to get this.
And be cognizant of the time. I think I burned it almost all up. Who's the timekeeper back there? We're all right?
No, okay.
Yeah, we have a little over 12 minutes.
Okay. We have
Oh,
a few
12
more
minutes. I
left.
thought you said 5. Okay.
We have one question from Shelley at the Heinz History Center who asks, can existing PDF formats be converted to PDFA?
The answer is yes. But we looked at that because we probably had 500 million documents before PDFA came along that was in our collection. And you had to say to yourself, what value proposition am I going to get? So if in your collection your PDFs are graphical, for instance, and you want to just convert them to PDFA, I wouldn't recommend it as necessary, because what do you pick up with PDFA? You get a font set, right? When you do a natural, when you do a regular PDF and you convert it in, you're not going to get the fonts off of a scan, and so you're not picking anything up. Now, if you want just to have more regular, say everything we have is PDFA, yes, and there's software that will do bulk stuff and convert for you. I think you're just looking for problems in doing it. Putting on my old legal hat, my prejudice is always authenticity, and I've testified 500 or 600 times in a courtroom over records when I was with the state. And you get in there, and Mr. Levenson, what is it you brought to us today? I have a document. Where'd you get it? Out of our file room. Who has had care, custody, and control of this? Well, it's been in a locked file room that only state attorney people can get into. Okay, sir, has any alteration or change been made to this? That's where the digital will get you. Because you're going to say, well, yes, we got it from the public, and we've had 6 migrations, and this is the latest version, and you can just expect defense counsel to jump at that point, and they're going to say, and did you record that mathematically identical from version 1 to version 2 to version 3, and how can you prove that to this court today? And I mean, you're just looking every time you migrate records, if they have either evidentiary or authenticity issues, you're asking for trouble. And you're asking, I've been there, I've done the testimony, and see, the problem is that when you look at the Constitution, you get a right to face your accusers, right? But documents are the exception. And when documents are presented and are evidentiary against you, you've got to, first of all, see that they're authentic records. They could be state records that are getting submitted. And of course, then you're going to get a subpoena to say this was in your archive, and is it true and accurate? And so there's quite a bit of arguing when a document's important like that. And so you've got to say, yeah, we had an algorithm that went in and we had a checksum, and we ran the checksum and we authenticated the document. It was in good shape. There was no bit rot. And then we did the conversion, and then we have this software that compares the 2 versions, and mathematically they're identical. Then you'd be all right. But I doubt anybody's going to have that. And that's a real burden to do. So, if you can avoid migrations and conversions, my recommendation is, just for evidentiary reasons, it's the last thing you want to do. Not that you shouldn't do it. I mean, you may want to have a single form in your collection, but it's a decision I don't take lightly, and that's why in the federal records, in the federal court records, what the attorney submitted is, you want to look at it today, it's what the attorney submitted, and that gets rid of all those issues, or what the judge signed, whether it's the death warrant or the fact you owe $10,000, it's what the judge signed, and there's been no alteration to it. Which was a real issue. I mean, in the old days, I don't know how you guys did it, but in the courts, when we looked at authenticity, it had the Bates black stamp and the timestamp in blue on the original copy, and that's the original. It's authentic. I mean, it was done by color and by by what changes were made to a document as it went through your workflow, and you could tell that that's our court stamp that got put on it, so obviously it came over our front counter, kind of thing. Those things, you've got to replace that in the digital world somewhere. Did I answer your question? I think I diverted a little bit. Whose question was that over there?
That was an online question.
Oh, online, I'm sorry. No wonder I couldn't find the
Yeah.
nice lady over there.
And we have another similar question from Gary, who asked, most of our photographs are scanned into high-resolution TIFF files. What format would be used for scanning photographs for integration into a PDF-A file? Is something more compatible than TIFF?
Well, if you convert your TIFF portrait into a PDF with a contained TIFF, the reader will embed a PDF-A of a TIFF picture. It will embed. Now, what happens is you've got at that point you've got around it the ability to throw your XMP on for your provenance if you need to within your collection, and to do other things. There's not a lot to do. You can just convert them to PDF-A, self-contain them. They're still going to use TIFF, but it's going to store that TIFF renderer that you've got. But there is my favorite is JPEG 2000. If the person on the phone, of course, they can't come back to me because it's a 30-second lag. But JPEG 2000 is my favorite because mathematically, anybody have JPEGs that they use photographs and they start getting kind of blotchy after a while, the old ones in there? That's because the compression algorithm in JPEG is a lossy format. And as a lossy format, it kind of guesses it should be about this color. And after it makes those sort of guesses, it starts getting blotchy. And JPEG 2000 has the ability to be lossless. So the answer to her photography question directly is any lossless format. JPEG 2000 is my favorite. Library of Congress, for instance, are storing all their video in JPEG 2000. That's their, and if you want other formats, the library, by the way, has a web page with formats on it, recommended long-term formats, and they've done a lot of research on that, and they've worked with me on the PDF side. I'm very confident they're technically accurate. That's available on their website. They did a lot of work on that, so those questions can also be further researched. I'm out of time.
No, I actually had a follow-up question to that.
Can you speak into the microphone so I don't have to repeat it? Thanks.
Speaking to the TIFF question, we might encounter state agencies or otherwise that are required to keep records permanently or long-term, and that's what we're utilizing the PDF-A format for. What about those types of things where they want to maintain that high-resolution image to be able to go back and examine that image on a one-to-one basis? You had mentioned the PDFX, PDFR. Is that a separate option? Is there a capability in PDF-A? I know you had said about embedding.
The rendering, they will not lose their rendering quality by converting into any of the PDF family.
Is that by conversion or embedding?
No, it's just going to encapsulate it. It's going to put the PDF stuff around it, and it's going to have it embedded as a digital object inside the file. But the rendering engine will be PDF driven and not externally driven, where you got to go find one. So that is an option. If that person wants to contact me directly, I'll get you in touch with some world experts on you've got my contact information. I'll get in touch with some world experts that'll give them some more advice on that.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more question. Could you talk a little bit about batch conversion of digital files to PDF-A, and what would we need to watch out for if we're moving into this?
Well, I think I want to adopt part of my last answer about any migration needs to be seriously thought about if you're ever going to have an authenticity question of your records. If that's not an issue, these are just historical records of general interest and so on and so forth. There are batch converters, and they do a good job. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that whatever the software is that you buy, you have a clear understanding of the way that they're rendering and how they're doing their algorithms on compression. Because one of the issues of long-term storage is it gets big. And so you want to pay particular attention to compressing to the minimum amount you can, so that your storage over time is at least mitigated slightly. And I'm calling for a time question in the back, because I'm showing I'm on the hour.
We have 3 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes, I'm sorry. The clock's not helping me. We have any more questions? How about questions from here? Come on, guys, you're letting me down. Somebody's got to have a question. What are you going to ask that nerd standing up there? You don't know, huh? All right. Can't prompt you. No more? All right. I guess everybody can do a bathroom break or something, huh? All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me, and appreciate it.